There was a certain Ronan Finn in Ireland, a holy and distinguished cleric, a shield against vice and the devil's attacks, a gentle, genial, busy man. One time when Sweeney, son of Colman Coor, was king of Dallery, Ronan was there marking out a church called Killaney. Sweeney was in a place where he heard the clink of Ronan's bell as he was marking out the site, so he asked his people what the sound was. "It is Ronan Finn, marking out a church in your territory, and what you hear is the ringing of his bell." Sweeney was suddenly angered and rushed away to hunt the cleric from the church. He found him glorifying the King of heaven and earth in full voice in front of his psalter, a beautiful, illuminated book. Sweeney grabbed the book and flung it into the cold depths of a lake nearby, where it sank without trace. A day and a night passed, and then an otter rose out of the lake with the psalter and brought it to Ronan, completely unharmed. Ronan gave thanks to God for that miracle and cursed Sweeney. After that, Ronan came to Moira to make peace between Donal, son of A, and Congal Claim, son of Scanlon, but he did not succeed. Nevertheless, the cleric's presence was taken as a seal and guarantee of the rules of the battle. Sweeney, however, would continually violate every peace and truce which the cleric had ratified. On the day fixed for the great battle, Sweeney was in the field before everyone else. He encountered Ronan with 8 psalmists from his community. They were blessing the armies, sprinkling them with holy water, and they sprinkled Sweeney with the rest. Sweeney thought they had done it just to mock him, so he lifted one of his spears, hurled it, and killed one of Ronan's psalmists in a single cast. He made another throw with the second spear at the cleric himself, so that it pierced the bell that hung from his neck, and the shaft sprang off into the air. Ronan burst out. There were 3 great shouts as the herded armies clashed and roared out their war cries like stags. When Sweeney heard these howls and echoes assumed into the travelling clouds and amplified through the vaults of space, he looked up and he was possessed by a dark, rending energy. His brain convulsed, his mind split open, vertigo, hysteria, lurchings and launchings came over him. He staggered and flapped desperately. He was revolted by the thought of known places and dreamed strange migrations. His fingers stiffened, his feet scuffled and flurried, his heart was startled, his senses were mesmerized, his sight was bent, the weapons fell from his hands, and he levitated in a frantic, cumbersome motion like a bird of the air. And Ronan's curse was fulfilled. His feet skimmed over the grasses so lightly he never unsettled a dewdrop. And all that day he was a hurtling visitant of plain and field, bare mountain and bog, thicket and marshland, and there was no hill or hollow, no plantation or forest in Ireland that he did not appear in that day. He launched himself nimbly and lightly and flew to Kilregan in Tyrconnell, where he perched on the old tree by the church. A long time he went faring all through Ireland, poking his way into hard rocky clefts, shouldering through ivy bushes, unsettling falls of pebbles in narrow defiles, wading estuaries, breasting summits, trekking through glens until he found the pleasures of Glenbalkin. That place is a natural asylum where all the madmen of Ireland used to assemble once their year in madness was complete. Glenbalkin is like this. It has 4 gaps to the wind, pleasant woods, clean-banked wells, cold springs and clear sandy streams where green-topped watercress and languid brooklime philander over the surface. It is nature's pantry with its sorrows, its wood sorrows, its berries, its wild garlic, its black sloes and its brown acorns. The madmen would beat each other for the pick of its watercresses and for the beds on its banks. Sweeney stayed a long time in that glen, until one night he was cooped up in the top of a tall, ivy-grown hawthorn. He could hardly endure it, for every time he twisted or turned, the thorny twigs would flail him, so that he was prickled and cut and bleeding all over. He remained in that state in Glenbalkin until at last he mustered his strength and flew to Clonkill on the borders of Banna and Tyrconnell. That night he went to the edge of the well for a drink of water and a bite of watercress, and after that he went into the old tree by the church. That was a very bad night for Sweeney. There was a terrible storm, and he despaired, saying, "It's a pity I wasn't killed at Moira instead of having to put up with hardship like this." When Sweeney deserted the kingship, his wife Ronan had gone to live with Gura. There had been 2 kinsmen with equal rights to the kingship Sweeney had abandoned, 2 grandsons of Scanlons called Gura and Yahi. At that time, Ronan was with Gura, and they had gone hunting through the Fuse towards Eden Terrace in Cavan. His camp was near Glenbalkin on a plain in the Armagh district. Sweeney landed on the lintel of Ronan's hut and spoke to her. "Do you remember, lady, the great love we shared when we were together? Life is still a pleasure to you, but not to me." And this exchange ensued between them. "Welcome here, my crazy dote, my first and last and favourite. I'm aisy now, and yet I wasted at the cruel news of your being bested. All the same, I would prefer a hollow tree and Sweeney bear, that sweetest game we used to play, to banqueting with him today. Tell you, Sweeney, if I were given the pick of all in earth and Ireland, I'd rather go with you, live sinless, and sup on water and watercress. My poor, tormented lunatic, when I see you like this, it makes me sick. Your cheek gone pale, your skin all scars, ripped and scored by thorns and briars. I wish we could fly away together, be rolling stones, birds of a feather. I'd swoop to pleasure you in flight and huddle close on the roost at night. They had no sooner finished than the army swept into the camp from every side, and as usual, he was away in panic, never stopping until twilight. Sweeney nimbly went on his way until he reached the old tree in Rasharkin, which was one of the 3 hideouts he had in his own country, the others being at Chack McNinnea and Clúan Crewa. He lodged undiscovered there for 6 weeks in the yew tree, but he was detected in the end, and the nobles of Dallery held a meeting to decide who should go to apprehend him. Linshahan, Sweeney's half-brother, was the unanimous choice, and he agreed to go. Off he went to the tree, and there was Sweeney perched on a branch above him. "It's a pity, Sweeney," he said, "that you ended up like this. Like any bird of the air, without food or drink or clothes, you that went in silk and satin and rode foreign steeds in their matchless harness. Do you remember your train, the lovely gentle women, the many young men and their hounds, the retinue of craftsmen? Do you remember the assemblies under your sway? Do you remember the cups and goblets and carved horns that flowed with pleasant, heady drink? It's a pity to find you like any poor bird, flitting from one waste ground to the next. Stop now, said Sweeney. It was my destiny. But have you any news for me about my country? I have indeed, said Linshahan. For your father is dead. Your mother is dead too, said the young man. And your brother, said Linshahan. Your daughter is dead, said Linshahan. And your son, who used to call you Daddy. When Sweeney heard the news of his only son, he fell from the yew tree, and Linshahan caught him and put manacles on him. Then he told them that all his people were alive and escorted him back to the assembled nobles of Dallery. They produced locks and fetters in which they shackled Sweeney and left him under Linshahan's supervision for the next 6 weeks. During that time, his sense and memory came back to him, and he felt himself restored to his old shape and manner. So they took the tackle off him, and he was back to his former self, the man they had known as King. After that, Sweeney was quartered in Linshahan's bedroom. Then harvest time came round, and one day Linshahan went with his people to reap. Sweeney, shut in the bedroom, took a leap out through the skylight of the lodge. He went lifting over 5 cantreads of Dallery that day until he arrived at Clonnachtach in Figail and took a rest there, in the top of an ivy bunch. It was the end of the harvest season, and Sweeney heard a hunting call from a company in the skirts of the wood. This will be the outcry of the Ifwe line coming to kill me, he said. I slew their king at Myra, and this host is out to avenge him. He heard the stag bellowing, and he made a poem in which he praised aloud all the trees of Ireland and rehearsed some of his own hardships and sorrows. After that poem, Sweeney went on from Figail through Banna, Benevana and Mahara until he reached Dunseverick in Ulster. He proceeded to Roscommon in Connacht, where he stayed that night, and the next day he went on to Slievachty, from there to the pleasant slopes of Slemish, then on to the high peaks of Slievebloom, and from there to Inishmurray. After that, he stayed 6 weeks in a cave that belonged to Donan on the island of Eigg, off the west of Scotland. From there, he went on to Ailsa Craig, where he spent another 6 weeks. Then Sweeney came to Ireland, reaching the plain of Moylinny in Antrim as the evening was drawing on. When he realized where he was, he said, "This was always a good plain, and I was here once with a good man. That was Scanlan's son, my friend Congal Clayan." After that, Sweeney went to the house where his wife Iarla was lodging with her retinue of maidservants. He stood at the outer door of the house and spoke to his former queen. "Here you are, Iarla, laid in the lap of luxury, and still there is no lap for me to lie in." "That is how it is," Iarla said. "But come in." "Indeed I will not," said Sweeney, "in case the army traps me in the house." "Well," said the woman, "it seems your mind has not got any better, and since you don't want to stop with us, why don't you go away and leave us in peace? There are people here who knew you when you were in your right mind. It would be an embarrassment if they were to see you like this." "Isn't that terrible?" said Sweeney. "Now I know it. It is fatal to trust a woman. and I was generous to this one. She's spurning me now. With that, Sweeney rose lightly and stealthily and went hopping airily from peak to peak, from one hill to the next, until he reached Mourne in the south of Ulster. He rested there. One time during his wild career, Sweeney left Slieve-Locher and landed in Feageil. He stayed there for a year among the clear streams and branches of the wood, eating red holly berries and dark brown acorns and drinking from the river Feageil. At the end of that time, deep grief and sorrow settled over him because of his terrible life. So he came out with this short poem. At last, Sweeney arrived where Moling lived, the place that is known as St. Mullins. "You're more than welcome here, Sweeney," said Moling, "for you are fated to live and die here. You shall leave the history of your adventures with us and receive a Christian burial in a churchyard. Therefore," said Moling, "no matter how far you range over Ireland day by day, I bind you to return to me every evening so that I may record your story." All during the next year, the madman kept coming back to Moling. One day he would go to Inishboffin in West Connacht, another day to lovely Assaroe. Some days he would view the clean lines of Slemish, some days he would be shivering on the moorns. But wherever he went, every night he would be back for Vespers at St. Mullins. Moling ordered his cook to leave aside some of each day's milking for Sweeney's supper. This cook's name was Miracle, and she was married to a swineherd of Moling's called Mungan. Anyhow, Sweeney's supper was like this. She would sink her heel to the ankle in the nearest cow dung and fill the hole to the brim with new milk. Then Sweeney would sneak into the deserted corner of the milking yard and lap it up. One night there was a row between Miracle and another woman, in the course of which the woman said, "If you do not prefer your husband, it's a pity you can't take up with some other man than the loony you've been meeting all year." The herd's sister was within earshot and listening, but she said nothing until the next morning. Then when she saw Miracle going to leave the milk in the cow dung beside the hedge where Sweeney roosted, she came in to her brother and said, "Are you a man at all? Your wife's in the hedge yonder with another man." Jealousy shook him like a brainstorm. He got up in a sudden fury, seized a spear from a rack in the house and made for the madman. Sweeney was down, swilling the milk out of the cow dung with his side exposed towards the herd, who let fly at him with the spear. It went into Sweeney at the nipple of his left breast, went through him and broke his back. Moling was told that Sweeney had been killed by his swineherd Mungan. Immediately, Moling and his community came along to where Sweeney lay, and Sweeney repented and made his confession to Moling. He received Christ's body and thanked God for having received it, and after that was anointed by the clerics.